Good evening and welcome to Grant Thornton webinar on the Interim Budget 2024. As expected, this was an interim budget and therefore no major announcements have come on the tax front. However, the government has clearly outlaid its intentions on the economic front by laying out the plan focusing on sustained development and fostering growth. At the same time, the commitment towards fiscal consolidation is also evident. The fiscal deficit has reduced to 5.8% from the revised budget estimate of 5.9%. The estimated fiscal deficit for 24-25 is expected at 5.1%. Hence, we are on the stated path towards reducing the fiscal deficit to 4.5% by 25-26. Over the last few years, India's growth story has been remarkable, despite some negative global headwinds. Structural reforms have strengthened the macroeconomic fundamentals, which has led India to becoming the fastest growing economies among the G20 countries. It is the fifth largest economy, and the overall investment climate is more favorable. India is expected to achieve a growth rate of above 7.3% in FY24, and the trend is expected to continue in the years to come, sustaining a growth rate above 7%. Although the IMF has published an estimated GDP growth of about 6.5%, the published numbers so far appear to support the achievement of 7.3%. The planned outlays announced reflect the government's continued focus on all key areas: infrastructure, aviation, railways, innovation, and inclusion. The Viksit Bharat, or the vision of a prosperous Bharat in harmony with nature, with modern infrastructure and opportunities for all citizens, continues to be a priority. For now, there are only four castes for this initiative: women, poor, farmers, and youth. The investments and schemes have been formulated to nurture and support these groups. We also learned a few innovative terms this time. GDP stands for Governance, Development and Performance. FDI stands for First Develop India. Now, coming to the tax front, as I said, there were no major proposals. The only changes are, one, on the direct tax front towards reducing litigation. Disputed demands up to 25,000 rupees will be waived up to financial year 2009-2010, and up to 10,000 for demands from 2010-11 to 2014-15. This will surely reduce the number of pending cases, though the overall impact on tax collections may not be material. Secondly, again on the direct tax front, sunset clauses have been extended on startups, on units established in IFSC, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, etc., by 1 year up to 31st March 25. There has been a continuing demand by taxpayers that such extensions should be for longer periods for better planning, at least 5 years, but that has not been addressed. Another thing to be noted here is that while sunset clauses have been renewed, the lower tax rate of 15% for manufacturing industries has not been extended. This seems to be a miss, especially in view of the focus on Make in India. On the indirect tax front, the GST Council in the 50th Council meeting had recommended to make input service distributor, that is ISD, procedure mandatory with prospective effect. Accordingly, amendments have been proposed whereby as a facilitatory measure, as the registration will enable credit even for transactions subject to tax under the reverse charge mechanism. Another change in IDT has been additional penalty in case of non-compliance are proposed under the GST to discourage tax evasion. Now today, to discuss the various perspectives of the interim budget 23-24, we have with us an esteemed panelist who will share their invaluable insights. We have Dr. Jayjeet Bhattacharya. He's an eminent economist who is the founder and CEO of Xeron, President, Center of Digital Economy Policy. He's also on the board of various prestigious organizations and has also published various books. So welcome, Jayjeet.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also have Aditya Gupta, who is a chartered accountant, who is the head of tax function at Mondelez India Foods. He spent more than 12 years in consulting and has expertise in dealing with corporate tax issues, handling litigation, and devising strategies on complex GST and corporate tax issues. So welcome, Aditya.
Thanks, Riaz.
Going on, Jayjeet, I'll first come to you. The recent report on the Indian economy stated that India is expected to become the third largest economy in the world with a GDP of $5 trillion in the next 3 years and a developed economy or a developed country by 2027. How realistic is this? Do you believe that it is doable?
So let's look at how India will become the third largest economy. Which are the fourth and third largest economy as of now? So India is the fifth largest economy. So Germany is the third largest, is the fourth largest. Japan is the third largest, and they've got 4-point-something trillion as their GDP. Unfortunately, both of them have either zero or negative GDP growth. So they're not going to grow in the next 1 to 2 years, in the foreseeable years. Whereas if you look at India, with roughly about $4 trillion, because by March we'll cross $4 trillion, we'll be powering at least 6 to 7% per year, if not higher than that. If we just do a simple maths, we will cross $5 trillion in the next 3 years, and that takes us beyond Germany and Japan. So that's under normal circumstances, where it's ceteris paribus, everything else being equal, there's no other earth-shaking action that happens. But the situation that India is in, which is a healthy economic growth we're having, a lot of bullishness we're having, a lot of investments lined up, it's a hard-earned situation. We are actually in a very troubled water that we're operating in. We've got a good ship, but operating in a troubled water. What are these troubles that can really upset the apple cart? So if you look at globally, we are exporting roughly about $800 billion. By the end of March this year, we would have exported $800 billion. About half of them is merchandise, half of them is services. The moment we're talking about services, it's all getting challenged by something called AI that everybody is now aware of. At a very rapid rate, AI is getting into much of the services. We have seen big techs firing big numbers because these numbers are getting, or these jobs are getting replaced by AI. And therefore, there is no reason why much of the services imports that India is doing is not going to get challenged by AI. Do we have alternatives? Are we exporting AI as a service for that matter? Are we exporting computing as a service for that matter? We are still not there. The power consumptions required for such an effort are humongous. It'll take us at least half a decade to reach that level. So clearly in the next 3 years, it can have an impact on what we're exporting, so that half of the exports does get challenged. Even in terms of merchandise, there is significant amount of disruption happening globally. We are seeing the disjointing of the East and the West, especially China and the rest of the world. We are seeing supply chains getting disrupted and threatened. Threatened because of wars, threatened because of piracy, and threatened because of local geopolitical issues. And therefore, these commodities can get constrained. So if the commodities don't reach India, which is the inputs, how are we going to export? And even if they reach, the cost will go up because the insurance cost goes up because of the threats during the logistics movement. Just because there is supply chain constraint, the cost will go up. It's a demand supply issue. If the cost of the inputs goes up, then clearly the manufactured products will also cost more. That then disrupts much of the business models around which these commodities and goods are built on, and so they will probably not sell. So there will be a diminished market that will be there. In addition, what's happening is because of this disruption, markets are closing down. They're becoming more and more protectionist. Europe is closing down in the form of saying, oh, we'll have some green taxation. Whatever is being imported, they must have a large amount of their production driven by green energy. These are all protectionist measures, garbed in whichever way. Similarly, US has put over 500% taxation on Chinese goods. It's also trying to make sure that there is a lot of goods being manufactured within US. So we are facing a lot of anti-dumping duties on Indian products. So India is facing these challenges in terms of market access. On the other hand, we have not changed our policy. So we are a free, open dumping ground for all those entities and companies and countries which are not able to sell their products anywhere else. Because others have quickly built their protectionist grounds. Forget about protectionism, we are not even leveraging our safeguards fast enough. No, a safeguard brought in a year later is not of much help. Anti-dumping duty being brought in after 3 years of investigation, by the time those industries would die out. So those are a bunch of challenges coming from externalities, which is markets closing down, market access not being given, technological challenges, but also internally, if you look at the local geopolitics that we are facing, as it is last year, we had a hiked budget of about 13% of our budget amount going to defense. This year, there's an indication that that will be further hiked by 20%. So about, last year was about 5.4 trillion rupees that was given to budget. This year, it's about 7.5 trillion, which will be given to budget, to defense. And that's per force. It's not that we want to spend money on defense. If we don't do that, that's a national threat. If money goes into defense, and last year, as an example, 1/4 of that money was allocated to education. So 4 times education was going to defense, and we have to do it. It's not a choice that we have. Therefore, other sectors do get squeezed out. And if other sectors get squeezed out, then where and how does the economy grow? Because the government has been the primary driver of economy in this country, right? A lot of the spend and growth has been because the government has been putting money into infrastructure. If that gets curtailed, then there'll be an impact on the economy. And lastly, among the key points, there are many other points. Lastly, there is, as we all know, there is significant climate change happening. We are putting in money for climate change technologies, which will reduce the rate of climate change. But I think as we have all awakened up, we can see that climate change has already happened. So we need to put in money into the post-climate change era. To give you an example, we are right now having enough food grains for 2 years, right? When the climate change happens, and entire civilizations have been wiped out very, very quickly because of climate change. Harappan civilization got wiped out. The Romans became weak because of climate change. The productive lands will stop producing food, and the unproductive land will perhaps become green. And during the transition period, we may face famines for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So we need to put in investments into silos for food, which will be stored for a much longer time. And without that, there's a challenge. So there will be floods coming in. There will be other kinds of impacts coming in. And all of those can easily shake the nice stable ship that we have right now. But again, as I said, ceteris paribus, if none of these happen, we will for sure be the third largest economy by 2027 and cross the $5 trillion mark.
Fantastic. Some great inputs, Jayjeet. You spoke about the risk of imports and the supply chain disruption, maybe increased import bills, especially in oil that we may have a problem with. But one more thing that you referred to was AI, right, and the impact it will have on jobs. Now, India, particularly with its large population, young population, may be impacted the most as far as AI is concerned. How do you see this? But while AI may generate new jobs, maybe not at the same rate. So exactly how do you see the impact of AI?
Right, I think very well put, because people normally argue that when a new technology comes in, it may disrupt some jobs, but it creates far more jobs subsequently. There was a strike in US when the rotary dial came in, which replaced all those people who were, picking up the plugs and plugging them in. So you would call up the local center and say, please connect me to Riaz. They'll take out the plug and plug it into Riaz's line, and that's how you would get connected. When the rotary dial got invented, there was a huge protest and strike in US. Now, if that did not go through, double the population of US would just have been doing the plugging in and plugging out. So clearly more jobs got created because of changing technology. Even if you look at Delhi for that matter, the Tongawalas went on strike when taxis were introduced into Delhi. They said that jobs is threatened. But clearly there are far more taxi drivers out there than there were Tongawalas. So clearly more jobs get created. The only challenge with AI, and as I have been calling it for the last 10 years, it's extreme automation, which is automation happening very quickly, very fast, and at all levels, right? So it's not the low-level jobs that are getting impacted, it's the highly skilled jobs also that are getting impacted, which is why we see that high-paid jobs in the big techs are getting laid off, they are being shed. Now, is it possible that the economy and the government and the policymakers will be able to react so quickly to such a large amount of job loss happening? It looks very improbable and difficult. And therefore, that clearly is a big challenge. In addition to it, who's going to create this AI? There is, again, significant focus by the government to create AI within the country. And by AI, I mean generative AI, because that's the one that seems to be making much faster impact on jobs. But for that, besides having good manpower, we also need a significant amount of computation, significant amount of data, and significant amount of energy. To give you a view of what is it that we're talking about in terms of energy, a new AI data center for Google will consume about 1 gigawatt of energy. And how much is 1 gigawatt? Delhi consumes 7 gigawatts. We're talking about 1/7 of Delhi's energy being put into one single data center to create the kind of AI or fundamental AI that Google and Microsoft and others are creating. It's a challenge. Why is it a challenge? Because from a policy perspective, the question will be, shall I divert this much of power to AI, which will benefit some people, or shall I divert it to the MSMEs, who can then generate more jobs, do more manufacturing, contribute to the economy? And these are not easy questions to answer. Now let's also make a little comparison between a AI data center which consumes 1 gigawatt of energy and the human brain, because it's basically replicating the human brain. The human brain consumes about 50 watts of energy, which is the same as a light bulb, right? So a light bulb versus 1/7 the energy that Delhi consumes. The reason I mentioned that is that there is a tremendous amount of scope in AI to reduce the computational inefficiencies of the algorithms. So right now the algorithms are created in a manner that it consumes that kind of energy. A billion into billion matrix multiplication is what needs to be done to solve some of these problems. And therefore, perhaps where India can contribute is creating the new kinds of algorithms for AI. But again, for that, we need data. Now, the government has stepped forward saying we'll provide all the government data for whoever wants to create this AI. But is that sufficient? Is that data in the kind of format that we need? Is it the same kind of data that, let's say, Microsoft or Google or Amazon has? Clearly not, because what Microsoft and others are having are conversational data, which means that, if they replicate what I'm saying and it's generated by a bot, it'll have the same annotations, it'll have the same kind of pauses, same kind of speech rather than a robotic speech, right? Which is text to speech conversion. The reason I'm going into these details is also because this threatens our voice-based BPOs, right? So chatbots have already threatened our some of the email-based transactions that we were doing. It's now also going to threaten our voice-based transactions, because the voice on the other side will no more be a robotic voice. It'll be able to understand what is being said. It'll be a conversational voice, and it'll be in any nature that you want to speak. If it's an American accent, if it's a European accent, you can make it speak in any accent you want with no disruption on the other side, because the other side is just a robot. And therefore,
there I would like to assure our audiences, we actually have Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya sitting here. It's not a bot, it's not AI. Yes.
So in fact, my latest article talks about the fact that there is now given plausible deniability, because you are insisting I'm here, your video is saying so. When you put it up as a permissible proof in the court of law, I can always argue that was a deep fake. So the entire CRPC, the entire Evidence Act goes out of the window. And the reason I'm again mentioning this and taking a segue from what you said is that it's going to have very fundamental disruptions in the economy. The legislations are going for a toss. All your electronic evidences will no more be taken in as permissible proof in the court of law. And therefore, there is very fundamental plumbing that needs to be done. And how fast we do that, which will then lead to more jobs getting created, becomes a question mark. And so it is a very challenging situation that we'll face because of AI, which I term it as extreme automation.
Oh, great, thanks a lot, Dr. Jayajit. Maybe it's also a case for going back to areas of energy generation like nuclear energy that we have moved away for safety reasons, but maybe that's a clean energy that may again be seen once again. Thank you. Coming to you, Aditya, that in the recent past, the government has taken a significant step by decriminalizing various offences under the Companies Act. But the same thing has not been replicated as far as the tax laws are concerned. You know, where there's prosecution even for minor TDS offences. So what does the industry think of that?
I think first of all, thank you for inviting for this session. And sir, it was a great insightful session that you talked about. Actually, I forgot that I'm a tax guy and I have to talk about tax because it's so insightful about AI and all those things. But yeah, coming back to the question, see, I think as I think I'll take clue from what he just mentioned about the what lies in terms of India's growth story and all those. In terms of the competitive advantage that we have, right? I think the only thing is that we have to have a change in the mindset, right? When we have a change in the mindset, it's about that people should feel happy when with the investing into India. There has to be some sort of predictability and certainty for the investments that they make, because that's how they will say that, okay, we are committed to a country, right? These measures, when they talked about in terms of decriminalizing, I think they were quite welcome move from a Companies Act point of view, because we had plethora of provisions which talked about criminalization of or launching of prosecution even for small defaults. And government did the right thing to make sure that the people should work and operate freely without having any fear of this. Now, income tax is sort of a revenue for the government, right? And they want to ensure that the revenue is intact. And the way TDS provisions operate, they are more like that they have made the corporates as well as the person who is going to collect the taxes on behalf of the government and deposit with the government. So they are acting as an agent for the government. Now, if the agent collects the money but does not deposit with the government, then obviously they would want to be looking at it in a very, very different lens and want to impose certain stringent measures to make sure that these things do not happen, because ultimately the government is deprived of their revenue through an agent. And therefore, I think the provision of prosecution, particularly for TDS, as well as for GST provisions in certain cases wherein there are prosecutions, if you look at the theme of those measures, they all talk about that if you collect the taxes from somebody, but you do not deposit to the government treasury. So you collect, but you do not deposit. Therefore, you are making good from the government money. In that case, they are looking at the prosecution and launching prosecutions. Obviously, there were a lot of things earlier that even if you collect the tax, even if there's a delayed deposit, in those cases also there were prosecutions. But of late, what we have seen is that there's slight acceptance with the government authorities that, okay, you can do away with interest, right? We'll not be launching prosecutions. But I think if you look at this provision, to my mind personally, I feel this is right. Because if you cannot collect money on my behalf and not even deposit to me, because I need to ensure that whatever I'm asking you to collect, you're paying to me. So from that perspective,
but what about errors in collection itself?
See, the errors in collection is obviously there, that people sometimes miss, they do not collect, or they don't know the provisions. Obviously, in those cases, the prosecutions are not warranted, right? There has to be a genuine default. There has to be a mens rea if we really talk about. The mens rea is something which is seen when person collects and does not deposit, because there's a mentality that is involved that I'm going to defraud you. But in the cases where there are genuine errors, obviously they do not warrant a prosecution in those cases. So there has to be some sort of line which has to be drawn in which cases the prosecution should be launched, and the cases where prosecution should not be launched. Obviously, it is not prosecution has a different annotation altogether, right? You have you go to the criminal code, there's a lot of brand, reputation loss, and everything is there, right? So nobody wants to get into that area. So government also has put up this measure to say that, okay, to not, but obviously these provisions should not be used blatantly by the government to launch prosecution, because they do impact the conducive environment of doing business. Because people should be, they should, if they're acting in the right spirit, then that should be honored, or that should be, even if you want to penalize them with harsh penalties. But prosecution is something that should not be looked at it. Yeah.
So just as a follow-up to that, industry generally complains of, very onerous compliances, and they go against the stated policy of ease of doing business. So what are your views on these compliances, and what can be done to kind of relieve some steps by the government which can address those
obviously, whenever this question is asked at whatever forum, that can the government ease the compliance, there's always a yes answer from industry, yes. And I think, as we were discussing earlier also, the compliances have increased multifold with the onset of GST. Obviously, there are larger benefits to the government. There is a broadening of tax base which is happening, but obviously it puts a lot of onerous obligations on the companies also to do the compliance. Now, a company has to have mandatorily file a 25 returns if it has one registration in the country. Also make sure that that is complete, tied up to the rupee, because that is something that you are collecting the taxes and depositing to the government. Now, one is the filings, and if a company has say 20 registrations, we are talking about 500 returns annually. Apart from that, you have withholding tax returns, which are to be filed on a quarterly basis. Then you have monthly returns which do. So there's always a set of around 500, 600 returns which a company of a medium size files in the country. One, is that required? Because government is already having a lot of data. They introduced e-invoicing, which was a welcome move. Obviously, they introduced during the COVID time in 2020. But that was something which was really, which was a game changer. And a country like India, with so complex situations, they introduced the GST with e-invoicing. Now, government has all the data. If you talk about GST as well as for a corporate tax, they have all the data. Now, can they not reduce the compliances? Yes, they can. Is it really necessary that we have to file those returns on a monthly basis? Can something be done? Yes, it can be done. Can there be a reverse mechanism that government asks that through our data analytics, these are the taxes that you have deposited in first 6 months. These are this is a data analytics that was there for the previous 6 months. Now respond. Now these are intelligent questions that government can ask through the data analytics that they have with them. And that is something which the industry also looks at, because see, ultimately what we do as a tax managers is that we also ensure that our numbers are fine through the data analytics, right? We also do make Power BIs and make sure that how the trend is looking. It should not be that that the numbers are completely off. If they're off, then there's something wrong. But then that maintains the checks and balances. So government can really intelligently create some ecosystem to say that, okay, we are reducing those compliances, but that is how you have to answer our question. Similarly for income tax, right? In income tax also, there has been a sea change for faceless compliance, this thing. But one of the things that we really found was that though we had a technology which was introduced through a faceless, that okay, you interact to the, but there has to be a change in the mindset also, right? That mindset change is something which comes through over a period of time. But have we really gone to that level? No. There's a lot of ground to be covered. But are we in the right direction? Yes, we are in the right direction. So I think those things are there which because if you talk to somebody externally, say even if you talk to your overseas folks, these are the 2-3 things that they talk about. That okay, oh, you have 500 returns in the country, you have got so much of tax filings, half of your team is totally engaged into that. Now these things are something which look a bit primitive. That even today's time you are doing all these things.
I completely agree. In fact, I think some steps are being taken in the form of those pre-filled forms, etc. So maybe it's something that we move towards going forward. Yeah, just we've also been joined by Ramendra Verma, who is a senior partner with Grant Thornton and is the national sector leader for the government sector. He has over 28 years of experience helping government departments and large organizations improve their processes through technology, data quality, and control interventions. He specializes in using technology for process improvements. Welcome, Ravindra. Ramit, just India needs to focus on these four pillars in Viksit Bharat, where we speak about the poor, the women, the youth, and the farmer. So what can be the key policy initiatives taken by the government to strengthen these pillars?
So I think the government is already on a path, and this interim budget it just gives the direction that it will continue on this path. So as far as the urban or rather the youth is concerned, the focus has been on the employment. Now there are various initiatives which they are thinking of generating employment. One of the sectors where the maximum multiplier is there is the tourism. So government intends to focus on the tourism where it creates more employment, and it has been talked about in this interim budget. Again, coming to the women part, I think we have had a case of almost 2 crores Lakpati Didis self-help group, which is at the lowest level at the villages where there have been some success for the government, and they have increased the target from 2 crores to 3 crores. And mind you, this is a very important thing because women in villages are the core to the development. It is something one can generate additional couple of percentage of GDP growth if one is to harness the manpower strength of the women folk in the villages. So that the focus there is something which is unique, putting that aspiration that will move from 2 crores to 3 crores. It is not only an economic empowerment, it is gender empowerment, it is the focus on the education of the kids, it is focus on the health of the, so we cover a large part of our population when we look at focusing at the women folk at the villages. So I think the government has been talking about the poor, they have been talking about women, they have been talking about farmer. I think on the farmer side, right now they have been working on various fronts, but I think some of those key successes which they have tasted in terms of nano fertilizers, they are prevalent only in a few sectors, in a few regions. How can we replicate across the country? I think that's where it is focusing much. It also talks about how can we be Atmanirbhar on oils? How can we be less reliant on imports in terms of our oil? Can we have more better seeds where we have better productivity in production of oil? So that's the other part where they are focusing on the farmers. Apart from that, they are also talking about how can we improve our sea economy, the fisheries part. That's a huge amount of investment which is going in that direction, that how can we increase income of our coastal belt people. So that's the other area. And apart from that, you have horticulture and allied areas. So the focus continues. It is not one term or one decade in which one will be able to see the difference. But a consistent effort in that direction is generating, much more growth. And if you couple that with the focus on the infrastructure which they are looking at, building roads, the outlay which is put on the infrastructure, and then you harnessing these powers from various parts, whether it is startup, whether it is youth, whether it is women, it combined effect is a multiplier effect. I think that's where the government is moving in that direction, and we are getting much better results.
So the journey has already begun.
Yes.
But the FM also mentioned that digital public infrastructure is one of the major elements for people-centric, inclusive development. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's correct. I mean, the amount of the DPI the government has been focusing on, we have been building various stacks in various sectors. That just shortens the time of getting or benefiting a large part of our population without going through the same journey, of self-discovery. So these DPI is something which is very important. The government has already started on that journey again, building various stacks for various things, whether it is health, whether it is education and so on. So that is something on the right path, and I think we'll start getting results in the next 4-5 years possibly.
Great, thank you. Jayajit, coming to you again, you referred to it, but one challenge that one can foresee is the trade-off between economic development and energy transition, carbon footprint. How is that going to impact India's growth journey? Any thoughts on that?
So I think the energy transition story has been pretty much abandoned in Europe. The moment they got into this challenge of trying to source energy from Russia, that's not happening. All the coal-fired plants that were mothballed in Germany are back on track. Now the expectation is that developing economies such as India is supposed to throttle its growth for the sake of finding clean energy. That's not a valid expectation. We are a rich country. We are a rich country, and will pretty soon, as you had mentioned in the beginning, will become the third richest country in the world in a couple of years. But we are a rich country of poor people, right? So our per capita income is still not $3,000, right? And it's a long way before we reach a $10,000 mark. It is not justifiable that we throttle the aspirations of our poor who want to have a decent lifestyle for the sake of energy transition, which the rest of the world is not following, right? They are following, they will follow it when they want to, they will not follow it whenever they want to. So I don't think that the Indian government is also in a mood that we will choke growth because of energy transition. However, having said that, we have naturally reached a level where renewable energy is turning out to be cheaper than coal-fired energy, right? In the auctions that have happened for power, solar power has come to around 2 rupees, 20 per unit. And obviously on an average it will come to about 3 rupees, which is quite competitive. Over a period of time when the solar panels get fully depreciated, it almost becomes free energy. So you get free energy, we are blessed with lots of sun, so we are actually at a competitive advantage when we compare ourselves with the cold countries. So it does make sense for us from a competitive advantage perspective to move into clean energy. And as a byproduct, it also helps the planet. In fact, when people say save the planet, I kind of hesitate because the planet will always be saved.
Yeah.
Planet is not waiting for us. It has been bound by asteroids, by volcanoes. The planet has been there. So it's essentially about us as humans, right? It is definitely having a huge impact on us. And which also brings us to the other point that I did not see in this budget is tackling pollution. It's one of the biggest issues that especially at NCR we are facing, but so are people in Mumbai, Kolkata and so on and so forth. They're all facing the same issue. So as we are doing the transition to cleaner energy, the pollution is not coming from just unclean energy, it's also coming from our agricultural practices. And a lot of investments are needed to make sure that that transition happens so that we are able to breathe properly and we as humans survive. The planet will survive, but the issue is about humans. And as we are not investing in reducing pollution, the healthcare cost is going up. The number of strokes have gone up, the number of heart attacks have gone up, the overall number of deaths have gone up because of the tremendous amount of pollution that we are living through. It's not a state issue, it is a cross-state issue. There are multiple states that are involved, which is where it's not just about transitioning in terms of energy usage, but the overall issue of pollution. Because pollution is coming from various aspects and not just the form of energy that we're using. And I don't think there will be a pause in the growth. I don't think that's a trade-off that we can afford to do, because we need to create about 8 million jobs on an annual basis. We need to grow at least 8%. The target that what the government is looking at is about 7%. I think we need to increase that pace. And with all the headwinds that are out there, with the global uncertainties, the wars, the geopolitics, the geoeconomics, it's a lot of challenges that we are facing, and therefore we can't make that trade-off. But under the natural circumstances, we are going towards a glide path where we will automatically move towards clean energy. But along with it, because the focus is not saving planet but saving humans, we also need to reduce pollution, and that's a significant investment that we need to make.
No, absolutely, because while there cannot be a trade-off, we cannot survive unless the human life survives, right? Just one other area I wanted to completely changing tracks. It is about the India, Middle East and Europe corridor that the finance minister referred to. How exactly does it impact India? Is it a game changer? What are your thoughts on this?
So let's look at the background in which this was created. Suez Canal has become a choke point. The cost of transition through Suez Canal has gone up. And the other way of doing it is going around the Cape of Good Horn in Africa, which means, again, the cost of transit becomes much higher because you have to spend that much more time. The holding cost of goods becomes higher because in transit, it takes much more time. So all that money is getting locked up. Therefore, we had to have another way of reaching Europe. That's been a 1,000-year challenge. Typically, the challenge has been from the other way side, which is the Europeans trying to reach India. Now, what we're trying to do is do it from both sides, although the idea came from India. And during the closing days of G20, this is something that got conceptualized, and very, very quickly that agreement came in through with all the stakeholders, and it was a natural step forward. It reduces the cost of transit of goods. It makes India more competitive. It also makes Europe more competitive. It's a win-win situation. It also makes all the countries in between much more prosperous because it'll go through UAE, they gain out of it. It'll go through Turkey and so on and so forth, through Greece and so on. Obviously, there are 3 points of loading and unloading that will happen that will still increase the cost, but not to the extent that that it becomes uncompetitive compared to going through the Suez Canal choke points or going through the Cape of Good Horn of Africa. So it's a great innovation. It's a great geo-economic innovation that has happened. And it's going to make all our commodities much more competitive in Europe. Having said that, we also had an initiative called the Chabar port in Iran. And it's something that Iran is quite unhappy about because it doesn't seem to have the kind of traffic that it was supposed to have. Now, that is not completely India's fault because Iran got caught up in the sanctions, and therefore the trade with Iran becomes a question mark. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that there was also a railway line that was built by the British, which went all the way from Turkey through the Middle East into Iran, into Pakistan, and just 10 kilometers away from the Rajasthan border. And that is one of the cheapest ways to do transportation. Now, clearly, we can't catch it from the Rajasthan border of Pakistan, but we can catch it from the Chabar port. And so we need not talk about trade in Iran per se, but we can use it as a transit. And you only have 2 points of loading and unloading if we go through that. I'm sure the experts in the government are looking at it, but it'll be interesting to also see another corridor open up and also use the investments that we've already put into Chabar port.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Coming back to money matters, Aditya, while there's been a renewal of sunset clauses by the finance minister, one notable exception seems to be the reduced tax rate available for manufacturing entities. Now, this maybe appears to be a miss because we have a focus on Make in India. So, where do you think this is going and your views on this?
I would also assume it's a miss because otherwise it is something which is quite an important measure to promote the Make in India. Ultimately, when people budget their investments, then obviously tax rate also factors into that, right? And there's an incentive which was when government introduced it for only for new manufacturing companies. And when they evaluate the options from an investment point of view, then obviously the tax factors comes in that we are going to set up a new entity, there's a new rate. So I would only presume that it's a miss because otherwise it's something which does not gel with the larger policy of the government.
So one can expect.
I think in the main budget that we'll have, I think it's going to be corrected. The only thing here is that I think the government should look at a more larger term this thing that probably they can extend the benefit say for next 5 years, and that also brings a lot of predictability and certainty on the tax rates from the company's point of view. At least their investments when they look at it, at least they have a certainty for next 5 years. These are the tax rates I'm going to be subjected to in India, rather than saying that okay because. Sometimes it happens that the manufacturing units take time to actually start manufacturing. There are a lot of factors which may take place, right? But at least having it for 5 years is something which is going to give certainty to the industry to say that, okay, this is there and we can plan, replan. And obviously we talked about, we heard him talking about the supply disruptions and all those things. So these decisions are quite contingent on those external factors also. Now, somebody would want to set up a factory in 2021 or say 2024. But because of the external factors, they may be delaying that decision, say, by end of 2024 or 2025. And at that point of time, they would say that, okay, we don't have a tax exemption there in India or reduced tax rate there. So all those calculations goes for a toss. So I think from that perspective, it really makes sense that please include in the main budget and give it a longer term, this thing. Don't extend it on a year-on-year basis.
I think this has been a long-standing demand from industry. So let's hope there is some movement on this.
Sure.
Coming to the progress of the BEPS Pillar 2 initiative. A lot of countries have already come up with their domestic laws. There has been no direct clarity as far as India is concerned on this. So how do you view this, and what kind of impediment you see in the implementation of BEPS 2 if India does not come up with the domestic law soon enough?
I think, see, this, I may not say this is a miss. Maybe the government is still evaluating, or maybe evaluating but trying to finalize the last contours of the legislation on this. And this we may see in the final budget when the government introduces the new budget. I think India, this is not going to impact the multinationals. It's going to definitely impact the outbounds, right? So there is a chunk of companies who are interested in knowing what is the legislation all about. Many companies in Europe have already introduced it. They have launched the discussion papers also. And as we look at and this all goes as part of the more stakeholder engagement, certainty, making industry as your partners for saying that, okay, how do we implement a legislation? I think even the discussion paper is not yet out. But if you really want to bring it out in say after 3 months, at least a discussion paper or something should have been out to say that this is what our thought process is, and invite comments from the industry that how do you foresee it? Because this is not a complex, this is not a simple thing. It's a highly complex calculation. Even the OECD pamphlet which gave a sort of iteration, people are still struggling. How do we actually interpret that, right? And with that thing, if we really have to form a legislation, it has to be really thought through that how do you actually bring it out. So, and I think we are already running short of time because most of the countries are saying that from 2025 onwards we are going to bring it out. In fact, 2 years ago or 18 months ago, they brought the draft legislation that this is how it's going to look like. And from 1.5 years, we are going to, after 1.5 years, we are going to implement it. I think in the main budget, government should bring out some clarity in terms of what do they want to do. It will not, obviously India has a higher tax rate, 25%, so it may not bother them much, but at least they should have some clarity in terms of how those taxes will be collected which operate for the outbound investments if they are operating in a low tax jurisdiction. So maybe we expect that.
No, I think that's a very valid point, and you're right that it is going to impact outbound investments and not the other way around. Now, it's a difficult task for the government to manage. Firstly, to understand the total impact by bringing in this domestic laws to match it. And on the other hand, it has to evaluate that if we don't come up with domestic laws, whether step-down subsidiaries will end up paying tax in another jurisdiction. So it's a fine act to balance, and I think the government is grappling with that at the moment. Ramendra, coming to you, you know, on the startup scenario, what can be really done to, encourage the startups in India? Jaijit, in fact, earlier in our discussions was making a point that while we speak about innovation, innovation may not necessarily be for startups alone. So here, while we continue to push for innovation, what is it that we need to do for startups?
Okay, so just to begin with the innovation, I think we already have, a plan in the interim budget where we are talking about some 1 lakh crore or 50,000 crores money which is available on near 0% interest rate for the next 50 years, 1 lakh crore for the next 50 years. Now that's a very big incentive. I would rather not look with the narrow lens of a startup definition, which has been just defined 3-4 years back, which is pertaining to IT and should have started in 5 years. I think any organization which is doing innovation at a mass scale qualifies for the startup in that sense. If you look at this amount of money which is there, is very important. Now, we have been struggling between the academia and the industry for quite some time. And somewhere, that gap needs to be bridged. Now, if we look at the startups are largely the successful one, except Dr. Jajit's startup has been largely on the aggregation side. They aggregate various things, and that's how the valuation goes up. It goes up and down. So that's one part of the ecosystem which they have addressed. I think they need much more ease of doing business. They need some certainty in the tax laws, some easing in the compliances. All that the government is already doing. Now the key thing is, how can I unlock the value between the various parts of the government itself? First, the second is between the industry and the academia. I think this is the place where we need to steer the startups in that direction, where you start to unlock values. Right now, I think that's the area where we have been talking about this problem, but we haven't seen much of a support from the government to bridge this gap. So I would want, rather than to look something in that direction, where there is much more collaboration available amongst these entities.
Great, Ramendra. So just to put you on the spot, which of the finance minister's announcements will help the vision of Viksit Bharat the most?
I think this is the one which I mentioned. We need innovation at a very fast scale. Indians by nature have been, innovative. Whether we talked about jugaads, which is frugal innovation, right to the level when we are launching our satellites, we are reaching moon. There is an element of innovation in all of this. What we just need to nurture that innovation, nurture it in a sense that we are able to, give wings to the aspirations of various have-nots. I think we will be able to, reach there. And this 1 lakh crore for next 50 years is an important contributor. I would expect more of it. I hope to see many more innovations coming in various sectors, not only in IT.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, just following up on that question, when we speak about this particular, corpus for a 50-year loan, do you see challenges in implementing something like that and monitoring a 50-year loan? It is a large and humongous commitment. So how do you see it?
I think your question is at the heart of the problem itself, is that there is public money. And public money has to follow certain procedures, and rightly so, right? And when you put these procedures on top of money which is going to be invested into research, which by definition doesn't have a concrete outcome. In fact, it may have zero outcome, right? Because before we start doing something, we don't know whether that will work or not work. It becomes very challenging. Therefore, my guess is that there will be onerous requirements put on top by the time it peters down and comes down to the last level bureaucrat who has to implement it, because he has to do it the right way, following the GFR, following the extent processes, and so on and so forth. Now, once those processes are put into place, will it be worthwhile for the innovators to really go for the fund? Then becomes a question mark. Because if we don't put this process, let's look at the other way around. Let's say that it's easily given. Somebody knocks on the door and says, here is a piece of paper and here is the innovation I want to do. Will I be, can you give me the money? So that becomes a loan mailer, right? And therefore it leads to other kinds of issues. Now, if the government is going and giving this money for innovation, along with it, what is really important is also giving market access. Because you can innovate, and there have been a lot of innovations happening in the government labs, in CSIR, in DRDO, and so on. Are they seeing the commercial light of the day? They're not, because there is no market access to it. Now, what happens elsewhere is there's long-term contracts that are given, that if you are able to create this, then I'm going to buy this from you for the next 20 years. That is not happening in India. In fact, to the extent that we are actually facing the other problems, where in a given tax regime, people are going to have deciding to invest, but because the tax regime has changed, they stopped the investment completely. And I can take examples after examples. PVC suspension, very critical for the economy. Large number of players had decided to invest, But now we've got dumping going on in this country. And all those large investment jobs are now becoming question mark. If you look at isopropyl alcohol, again, very key components, very key chemical input for many, many industries. Same situation. There's dumping happening in the country. So our manufacturers and our startups and entrepreneurs are not able to get access to our own market. Forget about market in Europe and market in China and so on and so forth. If you look at critical minerals, again, something very important for innovation, for cutting edge stuff that both Ramendra and he mentioned. If you look at ferromolybdenum, same issue. There is dumping going on. We are not able to protect the market. So the ability to provide market access, the Indian market to Indian companies and Indian startups becomes the other side of the coin of giving funding for research. The two have to go hand in hand.
So it is a step in the right direction. It is something that is desired, but monitoring this is going to be a task. And I think what you've been repeatedly speaking about is very quick reactions to global movements to protect the industry to whatever extent we can is the need of the hour.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Aditya, one more question. Wish list from the main budget. What do you want from the industry perspective?
See, I think if probably this question would have been asked at the beginning, so I would have continued till now. But I think wish list just...
that was the reason I asked for your limitation of time.
So I think from a wish list point of view, and if I look at broad themes, I think industry looks at certainty. We look at predictive tax environment. Automation is something which is there with the government. We want an intelligent use of that automation, right? So that at least people can invest their time more intelligently in handling those things. Everybody wants to do better job. So I think if I talk about predictability, certainty, and one more thing is that we did talk about the ease of doing business. I think nobody wants litigation in their books. So government has to see that Sabka Vishwas was a huge success. If those things can be replicated, say after 3 years, 5 years, or whatever, I don't know the mechanism what they're going to bring in. But these are the forums that the government can look at, or the where people can just close the amount, pay the amount and close the litigation, because nobody wants litigation in the books. So I think from that perspective, these will be 3-4 broad items that we look at.
Great. So the key themes you're talking about is certainty.
Yeah.
Certainty,
Absolutely.
certainty, and alternate dispute resolution mechanisms.
Absolutely.
These are the two R's. Thank you very much. I think we could continue for another hour with the kind of invaluable insights that the panelists have all come up with. Thank you very much for that. We all agree that this is an interim budget, and while no changes in the tax laws could be proposed in light of good governance practices, at least the government and the finance minister has clearly laid down its commitment to the focus areas of growth that it has set out over the last few years. Thank you very much.